Welcome to the Talent Empowerment Podcast, where we support business transformation and share the stories of great CEOs, founders, entrepreneurs, and leaders of all backgrounds so you can borrow their vision, their tools, their tactics to lift up your organization, your teams, and your community. I'm your host, Tom Finn, and on the show today, we have the Director of Intercollegiate Athletics for Texas Christian University, or the TCU Horned Frogs, Jeremiah Donati. Jeremiah, thrilled to have you on the show. Welcome, my friend.
Thanks for having me. Good to be with you.
Well, if you haven't had the chance to meet or be introduced to Jeremiah, let me take a minute to get you all acquainted. Jeremiah was appointed as TCU's Director of Intercollegiate Athletics in December of 2017 and previously served as the Deputy Athletics Director and became the 8th Director of Intercollegiate Athletics in TCU's history. Now, during his time at TCU, he's overseen fundraising efforts that exceed $500 million. That's a big number. Under his leadership, the TCU athletics program has grown to 22 sports, the most in the Big 12 Conference. And if you aren't sure what the role entails, one of the core competencies is to oversee the coaching staff for those 22 sports, which has seen 18 National Coach of the Year honors, including 10 by Sonny Dykes in 2022. 2022 also marked a big win in the Fiesta Bowl for you football fanatics out there, and a trip to the national championship game. With more than 500 student athletes in the program, they've recently recorded one of the top aggregate GPAs since the tracking began. Excellence in academics and athletics are an important part of Jeremiah's leadership. And if you want to know what he did before he became an athletics director at TCU, he was with Lee Steinberg Sports and Entertainment as general counsel and director of player representation. And he has extensive experience in professional and intercollegiate athletics, including fundraising positions with the University of Arizona, Washington State, and Cal Poly. Jeremiah, what an impressive track record, but we've got to jump right in and ask the straightforward question of, Director of Intercollegiate Athletics, how do you do that? How do you become an AD at a major university?
Well, good question. And there's probably a lot of ways to do it. I probably took the unconventional route. You'd mentioned it. I come from a legal background, but a really kind of sports and entertainment based, and always wanted to be back in college athletics, and really got some good advice from a mentor of mine, a guy named Jim Livengood, about going to law school that would better suit me to being in this role. There was a long time ago, athletic directors were typically former coaches, and he said there's a trend that most ADs now are getting their MBAs or even their JDs or Juris Doctorates, and that really put me on it really changed my mindset to think about this differently. So I went to law school, was fortunate to make some contacts there, and I was a kind of starving lawyer coming out of law school, working in pro sports in downtown Los Angeles, and ultimately found my way to TCU through a client of mine. I represented Chris Del Conte, who is now the AD at Texas, and he offered me an unbelievable opportunity to come here as a young fundraiser to oversee the fundraising efforts, and luck was on my side and had made the appropriate contacts and relationships that when Chris moved on to Texas, that I was promoted in 2017, as you mentioned. So my route's a little different. I didn't necessarily come up through college athletics, but had spent enough time on campuses where I kind of knew what I was doing. I grew up in Washington State University in Pullman, running around that athletic department. So I really knew what I was getting into and really knew that this was my passion, what I wanted to do. So took a lot of risks along the way to get here, but that's kind of my journey to the chair, so to speak.
In the way I think about the athletics director is the CEO of the university's athletics department. Is that the way to think about it? Is that the role that you play?
Yeah, absolutely. We have 250 full-time employees, another 500 to 525 student athletes. So essentially there's, anywhere from 750 to 800 people, give or take, under my purview, 22 sports, as you mentioned. And that really is probably the most accurate way to describe it. We have a budget of about $85 million. And so a lot of businesses within our business, from the ticketing business, from the fundraising business. And so that'd be a good way to put it.
Yeah, and I think people typically think of the athletic director as shaking the hand of the head coach and hoisting the trophy and being in on the sidelines and getting access to sports. But it's a lot more than that, isn't it? I mean, there's a lot of business behind what you do every day.
Yeah, there is, and it's not all. I love the way you said that. It's not all handshakes and high fives. Those are the fun parts of the job, and certainly we've been fortunate to have a lot of that this year. We've had a great year, but no, I mean we have I've got 16 direct reports. Each one of those direct reports makes up a different unit. So from compliance to marketing to communications, fundraising, ticket operations, sponsorship, advertising. I mean, I could kind of go on and on. There's a lot of components to the job. On one hand, we are one department within a larger university, TCU, but we also have an external facing department, which is season ticket sales and television and all those things. So it's a very interesting job. It's there are a lot of translation to the legal world, and a lot of things that I was brought up doing or brought through the ranks, so to speak, is coming back full circle, which is interesting because now you think with all this legislation, NIL. Ironically, as I used to be a sports agent, and like it was taboo. You could not pay players, you could not do endorsements, right? And now not only. And I think we might talk about this later, but now not only we're talking about NIL, now not only can you do it, you need to do it. You're encouraged to do it. It's necessary for success. So kind of funny how this come full circle. My legal background is finally paying off. So anyhow, and we have so much change in our business. Not since 1972 and the advent of Title IX have we really had this much change. And so it's really kind of a watershed moment for our industry. And I'm finding that my legal background comes into play a lot more than I probably thought it was originally.
So if you're a young up-and-comer in the market today and you're thinking, I want to be Jeremiah when I grow up or somebody just like him, what's your advice?
That. Maybe like you, and no one's saying that. Come on, Tom.
Well, what's your advice for somebody coming up who's thinking, I'd like to be in that chair? And Jeremiah took the legal route. Before that, you had to kind of be a coach and move into that job. What do you think the next generation is going to look and feel like of athletic directors?
Well, I get that a lot as far as people want to get in the business and they want to understand, what's your path? What do I do? And I tell people this, that, there's a difference between being a sports fan and knowing the business of sports. It's one thing to get on ESPN.com and, kind of read the articles and understand, get the hot trade, the hot trade scoop or whatever it may be, but really understanding the business of sports. And Lee Steinberg was really the one that put me onto that. The Sports Business Journal is kind of our trade magazine, if you will, of record. And any young person that I meet with, I actually give them a copy of the SBJ and say, read this thing front to back, and you'll understand the issues that we're really facing. So a couple things I would say is that, while you're young, get your advanced degree, whether it's SBJ, or, your JD or your MBA. I've got too many acronyms. And that, I think, will really, tell people this, there's a million people that look like you, literally and figuratively on paper. So what are you going to do to thin the herd, right? How are you going to separate yourself? Well, you can self-educate, which is the SBJ, Sports Business Journal. There's a lot of trade. There's a lot of ways you can get information about our business, networking. But I think getting that MBA and getting your JD while you're young and while you can do it before you potentially have a family or, a big mortgage or something like that, that's the time to do it. Those are things that can really separate you from the pack. As you can hear, I'm a competitive guy. That's how you're going to that's how you're going to move up the ranks and do that. So, any kind of advantage you can get into doing those things, you got to do. So, networking is really the big thing in this business, because it's kind of funny. It's hard to get a job unless you have experience, but you can't, you see where I'm going with this, but you can't get experience unless you have a job. So you got to be willing to take some risk, and, it's worth volunteering. It's not every sports job is with the Lakers, right? There's a lot of minor league teams. There's a lot of small colleges. There's ways to get experience that are unconventional, that you can, think outside the box that I did, that works for me, and that I've also seen people do. So, and the biggest thing is to have grit and just to get after it and hustle. And there's really no secret formula. No one's going to just, I get a lot of 22-year-olds that go, I mean, how do I become an AD? And I go, well, okay, I'm 45. So there's 23-year gap between where you are and where I am. And I'm a young athletic director, considered a young. So, you got a ways to go. So what are we going to do between now and then, right? And how are you going to build your resume, and how are you going to kind of move through your career? So, young people these days, they want instant gratification. So you got to try to manage expectations that, hey, it's hard work to do this in any industry, and you're not just going to, have a good week and be promoted. So you got to be in it for the long haul.
Yeah, you're speaking to the CEOs and founders out there that run businesses like you do, that say the exact same thing. And that's the funny thing about leadership, is people always want to pin it on an industry and say, well, you're a leader in this industry. But really, Jeremiah, your approach is to be a leader. And people from any industry can take similar approaches. You've got to work hard. You've got to have grit. You've got to focus on getting the fundamentals down. Advanced degrees can be helpful in certain industries, like you mentioned. All of that is part of a process that people need to go through so they can get to where they want to be. And unfortunately for some, it doesn't happen just overnight.
Right.
So let's talk about money for a second, because this is a really interesting topic for many. For the last few years that you've been at TCU, you spent a lot of time focused on fundraising. We said in the opening, you've raised over $500 million. Just talk about fundraising in the context of raising money for different projects, and how that works at the university level. Well,
most of that $500 million has been towards capital projects. If for those that are watching, maybe familiar with TCU, we renovated our stadium back in 2012, and then we did a second version of it this past year, 2 years ago. This facility we're in, Schollmeyer Arena right now, where I'm talking with you, our basketball arena we redid, which was almost $80 million. So a lot of that $500 million is big capital projects. I think phase 1 and phase 2 of the stadium, is about $250 million. So just right there in those projects, you're almost at $350 million. So those are kind of not easy necessarily to do, but they're easy to, from a fundraising standpoint, what your call for support is, right? I mean, you've got TCU people who love TCU football, TCU basketball, the university, the community, whatever it is, and you're asking them to with all their obligations in life, to give some of their hard-earned money to the university so that we can support our mission of, you said earlier, excellence in academics and athletics. And so sometimes it's really straightforward, right? Sometimes it's really easy, is that you give me this, you give us this, and we'll be able to build that. But sometimes when you're talking about endowment giving, and you're talking about, what's the old saying, sometimes you need to plant seed for a tree you'll never stand under. Right. So endowment giving is really kind of more of a long-term sustainability ask that you're making from the university. So you're asking people that love TCU, hey, let's from a sustainability standpoint, let's keep doing this, right? Let's keep building this thing. Let's make it better for the future generations, future student athletes, and future students. And so those types of asks are different. But really, it's just finding what people are passionate about. That's the biggest thing is you hear sometimes people call fundraising friend raising. And I don't know if I necessarily love that term, but getting to know people what their biggest, hopes and dreams as it relates to TCU are, is really the core of what we're talking about. Because once you figure that out, then I can come to them and say, look, I wouldn't come to you if this was not a really important thing. And I understand that you, it sounds as though that you have an interest in helping us here or there. Whatever it may be. And that's kind of where you connect the dots. That's the fun part of the job. The hardest part, as people say, I'm not in sales, I don't want to be in sales. Let me tell you something. I mean, you're in sales every day of your life. You had to sell your wife about going to here, not there. You had to sell someone on a concept, whether it's buying a ticket, you're, selling yourself in an interview. You're constantly selling. So fundraising is no different than that. It's just having the ability after you ask for the money to stop talking, right? That's the key to fundraising, is when you make the ask, it's going to be uncomfortable, it's going to be awkward, make the ask, and then just stop talking. That is like fundraising 101. So you can see I could talk about this for a long time, because it's a lot of fun. It really is exciting. It's a way to be, competitive in your It's a way to kind of bring competition into our business. And so, we've really gotten after it here. We, as a smaller school, 12,000 students, we got to do it a little differently, right? University of Texas is a 100,000 seat stadium. We've got 45. So, if we're going to do some things to compete with them, we're going to have to do a little more organically and really roll up your sleeves and get after it. So fundraising has been a big part of our culture. And, I'm just happy that we've been able to carry on that culture that was really started with Chris Del Conte, who ironically is at Texas. So, he kind of flipped me the baton and I was able to take it and run with a great team.
Yeah. And I think as you're listening to this discussion, you're thinking, gosh, all of this stuff in athletics sounds like business over and over and over and over again, right? How do we raise capital? How do we raise funds? Certainly for young founders that are looking to raise VC capital to maybe start their next project, right? You're going out there and you're talking about what's important to the fund, what's important to the venture capitalists, what's important to them in terms of output and outcome, and what products can be delivered. And that's exactly what you're saying. I always see these parallels between athletics and business that are so tight, and most people think they're separated in nature. And I think what you're doing is bringing this home for all of us to say, hey, look, we're all in sales at the end of the day, whether you like it or not.
It's
and
just
all of
about
this is tied together.
What's the value proposition, right? In my case, it might be selling a ticket or a $10 million suite. In a VC's case, it might be, you get what I'm saying here. It's the exact same ask, but just different answers.
Yeah, well said. And let's stay on the topic of money for a second, because as you mentioned, there's been a lot of changes in intercollegiate athletics. And one of those major changes is the NIL. Mm-hmm. So can you walk us through what that feels like today? Give us an overview of NIL for those that don't understand the core concept. Sure. And help us understand where this is going.
Sure. So NIL is the acronym for name, image, likeness. And so for forever in the college student athletes were forbidden for receiving money in exchange for their autographs or, photos or just their time, anything that you could, kind of lump into that name, image, likeness bucket. So that was strictly forbidden. And there were people that lost jobs. There were schools that went on probation. SMU went on the death penalty for paying players. Players lose eligibility. And then, so overnight, July 1st, 2021, those rules changed. And now not only is name, image, likeness permitted, it is encouraged, it's celebrated, and frankly, it's required if you're going to win, at this level. And so, what a paradigm shift, right? So we went from immediately having rules that would get you in trouble to now we've got 525 entrepreneurs on our campus. Because now, much like a chef or a musician or someone that just has a hot business idea, now they can make money off their name, image, likeness. And for a lot of these kids, remember, they're not going to play in the pros. This is the one moment in their life they can capitalize on their special talent at age 20 or 19 or 21, whatever it may be. So really an interesting moment in, if someone writes the book on this 500 years from now, this July 1, 2021 will be a very significant date. So, things changed overnight, literally, for us. And it's something all of a sudden that's shown up in recruiting. And name, image, likeness, generally speaking, is something I'm a big fan of. It's a former agent. This has given opportunities for young people. For a lot of these people, this is additional income that is really important to them, important to their families. And so generally speaking, it's a really good thing. I think a lot of times what we see in headlines is really more of a pay-for-play model, which is, I could kind of go off on that. But generally speaking, NIL has been a really good thing. I tell you, the challenges of it is the regulation of it. In other words, there are 50 sets of state rules that govern NIL. There's no one federal rule. There's the NCAA has provided guidance, but not a clear rule. And so right now we find ourselves in this kind of wild, wild west of NIL. And it makes it very difficult when the state laws in Texas differ from, say, the state laws in Georgia, which, ironically, we just played the national championship game. And you've got coaches competing for recruits. And we can go about NIL differently than they can. And so it creates this kind of uneven playing field, if you will. And so what you're seeing is a lot of lawmakers and regulators trying to come together with some semblance of one NIL rule. And I'd love to tell you there's been great progress there. But you can see probably by the smile on my face that there hasn't really been. And it's very difficult to get federal legislation passed, as you may know. There's what we're looking for is stuff like antitrust protection, state exemption, state preemption, excuse me, and antitrust exemptions. And those things don't come without significant trade-offs. And for, like, in our case, you're talking about student athletes as employees. You're talking about tax exempt status. It's very complicated, and it's very high stakes. And so, if we're sitting on having this visit 5 years from now, our world could look a whole lot different, and a lot of it would be centered around NIL. So, generally speaking, it's been a really good thing for TCU. I'm happy to say, or proud to say, that I think we've done a really good job of it. We've also partnered with our business school, the Neely School of Business, which is a top 25 program, and it has a top 5 entrepreneurial program to help educate our young men and women. As I mentioned, we've got 500 plus entrepreneurs now. And so, are you teaching them about building their brand, about paying their taxes, about filing an LLC, about doing all those things, right? Creating, building your brand, social media. All of those things are valuable tools they can take with them after their time at TCU. And that's really the long play here, is that, we can find ways to get you small NIL deals and a few thousand here, thousand there, but you're going to go off into the business world. You're going to go off into the real world. And what tools can we give you? What piece of the business school can we give our student athletes, or more of the business school to our student athletes, that sets them up for future success well down the road, well after their time at TCU has expired? Because as the continuum goes, we're going to come back to them as potentially supporting the school, right? So you want them to leave here with great tools. You want them to be successful in life. You want them to be incredibly passionate about TCU, because those are the same people that I'm coming to raise $500 million with my team on. Most of those people are alums.
Yeah, beautifully said, and that's a great backdrop on NIL. So I'd just like to take a moment to apologize to all of the college football players in the 90s, where I was playing NCAA college football on PlayStation without them receiving a dime. So my sincere apologies to all of you out there that in the 90s weren't getting any money.
You don't have to apologize, because there's a new lawsuit out there where they're taking legal action, class action, legal action. So they may get paid after all. So don't apologize yet.
Well, fair enough. And so as you start to think about this, what does this feel like to the individual player? Like, help us get our head around sort of the micro impacts here. Mm-hmm. So if I'm a volleyball player going into college, how is that different from an NIL perspective? Am I able to generate some revenue for myself, or is it really just the football team that's able to do it?
So, great question. And when this first came out, I think all of us were nervous that this was going to be the starting quarterback and the starting point guard on men's basketball and on football, and the rest was going to be kind of it, right? Well, what we found is that female athletes are getting a ton of deals. And so at TCU, in full transparency, our deals right now look like about 60% are male, about 40% female. Now, unfortunately, and so that makes me feel really good, because I think a lot of deserving student athletes are getting these types of deals. I think the money is really more weighted on the male side, and hopefully, we'll see that kind of balance out as NIL starts to kind of settle in, and I'll speak more about that in a moment. But, they're coming in now, and they're looking at, this is really a chance to monetize their talent. And there are some kids that are really motivated by this. And they're looking at schools that set up resources that are going to be helpful to them to secure more deals and secure more deal flow and potentially more revenue. And there's some it's not as important, but I think just about in every single recruiting conversation, especially in kind of your big 6 sports, which are your football, basketball, baseball, soccer, and volleyball. Those are the sports that are televised. NIL comes up, and it's what are the current student athletes receiving? What are the opportunities? Are there businesses or donors that are kind of extra motivated to help student athletes there? And so those are things that coaches are having to be prepared for, to have discussions about. Because while I can't facilitate a deal and guarantee Tom Finn X amount of dollars to come to TCU, I better be able to know. Yeah, I see Smod. I better be able to tell Tom Finn and his family, what kind of NIL deals kids are getting in the sport that you're playing. And obviously, you're a big, strong football player. You look like you could still go. So I'm guessing that was your sport of choice. I know you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I was playing flag football the other day with my 9-year-old and his flag football team, and I rolled my ankle. So if that tells you anything, on turf, by the way, beautifully designed turf. So if that tells you anything about my athletic prowess, I think I would pass, or you should pass on me coming to TCU to help in that regard.
So it's really, to close the loop on that, it's really provided a whole set of opportunities that didn't exist before. So it's exciting. It's never been a better time to be a college athlete than right now.
Well, I'm going to flip the coin to the other side of this, because I think the business listeners are thinking, okay, Jeremiah, I get it from your side. I get it from the student athlete side. Help us understand the business side. So let's say you've got a CEO that's doing, 50 million in revenue, and they're a huge TCU supporter or any other university supporter in terms of the fact that they went to the school, they were educated there. And maybe they're thinking, how do I actually help? I've got enough revenue. I've got a great team. I'd love to somehow get involved as a business owner in supporting my favorite university through NIL. How does the business side work?
So there's all sorts of NIL deals you can do. And I would say one of the things I think that we didn't see enough of, or I think that we're surprised we didn't see enough of the first year of NIL, were more big corporate deals. And I think you're going to start to see more of that as the evolution of NIL continues. I'll give you an example. If we're right here in DFW, for those of you who don't know, TCU's in Fort Worth, Texas. And so, we compete with the Dallas Cowboys. You compete with the Dallas Cowboys for, just attention, basically. And everything does, not just TCU, not just TCU football. But if you're going to do an NIL deal, if you're going to do a sponsored deal with Dak Prescott, for example, it's going to cost you 7 figures. If you're a local startup company or a business, you're going to do a deal with Dak Prescott. You're going to do some commercials, or you're going to do social media. That's a big thing, is doing social media posts and having this kind of heavy promotion there. It's going to cost you big time. You do it with a TCU quarterback, you're going to be able to do it much more inexpensively, and there's probably a more authentic feel, right? Because as we always say, we're kind of the hometown team, if you will, of Fort Worth. So I think for a lot of business owners, there's a way to get in and do it much more inexpensively. Now, Fortune 500 companies, they're not going to care as much, and they can do, deals with all sorts of NFL players. But I think by and large, most people, don't run those companies, right? But they want to be, many of them want to be affiliated with athletes, and there's a lot of synergies and energy that comes with that. So I think you can do it. We're finding these deals are being done through social media. That's how you connect with young people. The media impressions. A lot of these kids, we've got kids on our campus that have 100,000 followers, right? They're big time influencers. And guess what? They're in markets with 18, really 16 to 25 year olds, right? These kids are spending money. You can see where this would be an attractive business model to get these people involved. But people do all sorts of NIL deals. These NFTs, that's a big, NFTs and technology boom. That's going to be a big thing going forward. That's just really a business that I think they're just touching the tip of the iceberg with. But a lot of, kind of your traditional car commercial, if you will, which is, I think, what people thought this was going to go. You tell me, have you seen a car commercial with a student athlete on there, or even an NFL player or an NBA player? Pretty unusual, right? So this is evolving. The space is evolving, but I think business owners and marketing departments are getting really creative with how you use this talent to make these kind of activations very authentic. So that's really exciting to me as a former agent, and it's fun for our student athletes, because it's how cool for them, right? They're getting a chance to really develop as young people, and that's part of our mission. We're educators here on campus, but you want to give them, going back to what I said earlier, the tools to be successful when they leave here, and structuring business deals and being involved and interfacing with business leaders and CEOs and heads of marketing and vice VPs. That's like, these are things they're getting a running start on the rest of their life. So I kind of answered your question. There's all sorts of ways that the business owners can get involved with NIL, and it's you're seeing that people are starting to get much more aggressive in their outreach. These kids have agents now. These student athletes can have agents now. That was a big shift from before, and so the deals are coming, and it's just fun to see how this is evolving. It'd be really interesting to see where it goes in the next few years.
Well, thank you for the education and training on how that all works and seeing both sides of the coin. I'm interested to sort of transition our conversation into kind of leadership and leadership style. And for those that don't know, Jeremiah and I have known each other for about, 20 years or so. And I can tell you that just sort of watching from a catbird position, I can tell you that Jeremiah has been the same guy for the last 20 years. He's always been this authentic, humble leader, and has had that style when he was 20 and has that style, at 40, 45. But I want to hear from you, Jer. What is your sort of guiding light when it comes to leading a team of 800 or so employees and partners in your organization?
Well, great question. And, I think along the way, Mike Krzyzewski, the former coach at Duke, said this one time, and this really resonated with me. Someone asked him, "What's your coaching style like?" And he paused and he said, "You know what? I don't really have a style. What I've done is taken this toolbox with me, and during my coaching career, I found something I liked from this coach when he was at Army. I found something I liked from this coach when I was at Bobby Knight, and I've kind of made that my own." And so, I've been lucky. I mean, I've been around guys like Lee Steinberg and Jim Livigan, and Chris Del Conte and Victor Boschini. I mean, I've been around some real legends in the business, and Bob Bowlesby and DeLoss Dodds. I mean, I've had a chance to be around a lot of really impressive people. So I've tried to be resourceful and pick up things. And one of the things that I always appreciate about basically everybody that I've worked for, they kind of let me run, and they empowered me to make decisions, to make mistakes, to take risks. And I try to do that with our team. I think hopefully my executive team, which is 16 people, 16 leaders in our department, would tell you that, I'm not peering over their shoulder, and I want to hire the best talent and let them run. Right. I think that's that's a lot of listening. And so, I find sometimes, especially in this business, that if you start talking too much, you're going to find yourself in pretty deep water and talking about things that you might not be best suited to talk about. I've got a director of compliance who's an expert in compliance. If I want to start doing his job, I'm going to make myself look pretty foolish because he's the resident expert. He's the subject matter expert. So I need to let him do his job. So I'm going to be better off listening and asking him to come to me with solutions, not problems, but solutions, so that I can use, kind of my value set against that decision-making process. So, I think everyone that works here would tell you that I'm a good listener, or that I try to listen. There's times in which it's probably not a skill that you're always perfect at, but I think it's something you can always strive for. And that kind of lends itself to a bigger thing, which is really communication. I mean, I think in situations where we've had failures or disappointments, or where I've let people down or I've made mistakes, most times it's a lack of communication or miscommunication. And so there's never a finish line with that, but I think that's a key component of any type of leadership. You can't be an effective leader if you're not a good communicator and you're not a good listener. So, I'm not, I didn't give you one style. Those are things that I've picked up that have been really effective for me. And, but I'd also tell you that my leadership style changes depending on the situation and depending on who the people I have to lead, right? Some people need to see it. Some people need to see me here grinding it out and in tough situations, and other people, need to be empowered to do it on their own. And so it kind of depends on the moment.
Yeah, I think you're right on. And trust and communication in leadership are two of the absolute cornerstones of what we do, right? Mm-hmm. You've got to trust, you've got to communicate. You build that within an organization by being authentic. Mm-hmm. But I always wonder from a leadership perspective, how you hold people accountable. Because the other side of this coin, when you're hands off and you let people lead and you empower them, which is absolutely the right thing to do, but then you have to hold people accountable, because there are some that will take advantage.
Yep.
How do you hold people accountable?
Well, expectation management. And this goes back to, I think, to your earlier question about leadership style. I think one of the most important things, and going back to, I can point out a few things that were, you wish you had a do-over on, right? Since I've been here in this role for over 5 years now, or just even my career. And you can kind of trace it back to improperly managed expectations. And so where am I going with this? So back to accountability. If you and I know what the expectation is, right? If you don't achieve that, well, then it's really easy to hold people accountable. Those are easy situations, whether it's terminating employment, whether it's moving someone into a different role, whether it's strictly just an admonishment. Those types of kind of, tangible accountability tactics, if you will. If you have clear expectations, those are easy. Where it becomes difficult is where Tom thinks he's up here and he thinks this is what we're doing, and I think it's here, and then we're way off, right? And then those things lead to other issues and potentially issues down the line with our staffs, and those are where you have bigger issues that start affecting the culture of your enterprise, your organization, or in our case, the TCU Athletics Department. So those are one small thing, and I'll give you a quick example. I had a long conversation with an employee, a senior level employee, who was having all sorts of difficulty with an early career position, and we took it all the way back to the starting date. And the expectation is that this leader on our team started making promises. Hey, you're here this long. We're gonna elevate you here. We can get you this salary range, and probably made some promises in the front end that we weren't aware of, or that we probably couldn't get there. And so this person came in thinking, hey, it's just a matter of time before I'm there. Well, that day never came, right? And so all of a sudden now you've got friction. He doesn't trust his supervisor. You just mentioned the word trust earlier. Absolutely critical, right? So back to expectation management, right? All these things are kind of connected, but I think that, of all the HR, challenges I've seen in my day, most can be attributed back to communication and improper expectation management. We preach those in just about every senior staff meeting we have, to be sure, especially with our younger folks that are new in the business, that we're managing expectations and we're teaching that, because when you have clear expectations, it's really easy to hold people accountable. If you don't, you're going to have, that's just a really, really tricky thing to put people in positions to hold people accountable when the people that are around don't even know what they're technically being held accountable for, or have different ideas of it.
Yeah, I love the way you said that. Hold people accountable and have clear expectations. That's just a cornerstone of fairness in the workplace, and trying to understand how to motivate people and ensure that we all have alignment as we go through the path. So, are there any tough conversations you have to have with folks in terms of hiring and firing? I mean, as the athletics director, you've got to hold coaches accountable for performance as well. How do you determine who to hire and fire?
Well, I think it goes back to your core values. We've got high expectations here, and it's, if you followed our athletics programs, we've did in the past few years, we have had to terminate some coaches, and it's they're tough conversations to have. But I think when you have a set of expectations, they're much easier, and you can. And when when the expectations are clear, these aren't surprises, right? Because no one likes surprises, and myself included. And so, talent acquisition is probably the most important thing that any leader of an organization really does, right? I mean, we're only as good as the people we have here, and the 250 people that work here. I mean, we spend a lot of time. I mean, there's nothing worse than bringing someone on board who's not a fit for them or for the organization. You become using a lot of time, a lot of human resources, a lot of other things dealing with those issues, and that just impedes progress. It hinders advancement. It's not a good thing, right? So hiring people is absolutely critical. It's probably the most important thing that I do here. I get a lot of credit. Leaders get a lot of credit when things are going well. I don't coach. It's my job to find the coaches, right? It's my job to keep the coaches, retain the coaches. And so that's probably my biggest job, or my most important job. And when things are, when we're not reaching that level of excellence, then it becomes easier to hold those people accountable. So yes, we have had tough conversations. I think any athletic director would tell you. You develop close personal relationships with these coaches. You get to meet them up close and personal, their families, realize their biggest hopes, dreams, fears. And when those things don't work out, those are tough. But, removing the emotionalism from that is also a key part of, I think, leadership, and being straight with people and frank. And so those conversations aren't as difficult as you make them out to be sometimes. And like anything else, you probably dread or fear those moments. But then when you kind of find yourself in them, if you've prepared, you've done the right things, you're able to do them fairly, like you said, which I think is a big tenet of being an employee here, and is one of my core values. Is I always look at a situation and what's the fair thing to do, right? What's the fair thing for TCU, but what's the fair thing to do for the employee? And I can 99.9% of the time, the answer to that I can live with. So that's just one of about 4 or 5 things that I really feel is important when you're kind of going through this analysis.
Yeah, I think one of the other items that people deal with that you've dealt with exceptionally well is this rise of CEOs and founders and athletics directors and leaders becoming public figures. And this is a big component of the job. You stand on a lot of stages, you shake a lot of hands. Back in the olden days, you might have kissed a few babies. But this is a really important part of the job, is sort of your professional brand and your public image. Tell me how you deal with that component of the job, because it's not easy for everyone. You make it look easy, but it's not easy for all.
Oh, you're too kind. It's sometimes what's the old saying, be careful what you wish for. There's, I'm on social media, and there's a lot of parts of it that are fun, and there's there's some stuff that's not so fun. But that just comes with the role. I mean, it's here in Fort Worth, and kind of everybody knows who you are, and so it probably bothers my wife more than me when you go out to dinner and your meal gets hijacked by some people that want to talk about the game or something that's going right or not right. I've had quite a few moments interrupted by some folks that wanted to get some stuff off their chest that I wasn't necessarily ready for. But you've got to, at all times, you're kind of on. And we like to tell our student athletes that the jersey never comes off, right? And so like it or not, if you don't like it, then this isn't the business for you. Social media is not for the faint of heart. And we tell people that so Instagram, no one has a bad day on Instagram, and Twitter is where all the hatred lives, right? There's some ugly stuff out there, and so fan is short for fanatic, right? And so people love sports, they love this place, the TCU fans do, and so when you're in the public in the limelight, or if you're a public figure, so to speak, it comes with the territory, and if you're not ready for that, this is not the business for you, because it comes at you pretty quick. When you're the deputy athletics director, like I was, or you're the number 2, when I was at Lee Steinberg, I could kind of, hang off to the side and let Chris or let Lee, take on the brunt of the criticism or whatever it may be. But when you're in that role, then it's obviously much different. So you got to do it with a smile on your face. There's some parts of it that feel like I've never been a politician, but there's parts of it that you've someone's always got a camera, and they're always waiting for you to catch you in that moment with your hands, your face in your hands after a tough loss or something. So you've got to kind of, and I'll give a great example. And this is kind of bring this home to the listeners and the viewers. You, Tom, were with me in Phoenix for the Fiesta Bowl, which was an unbelievable moment. And conversely, you were with me in the national championship, which was a great moment. We were there at the game, but the game didn't go well. It was a tough loss for us. And you kind of saw two sides of me, right? One was everything's going right. People are running up and hugging you, and you're loving it, taking pictures. And the other part is, the other part of it, which is, when you lose, right, and you still have to be there, and you've got to show strength, and you've got to be. If I'm breaking down, crying, and kicking things and throwing things, how am I representing this university, right? And how am I representing our teams and our players, our student athletes? And so, you've got to find the high road. And sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's hard to smile when you don't feel like smiling. Sometimes it's hard to take that call when you don't want to take that call or do what you need to do. But it comes with the territory. You have to embrace it. I enjoy it. There's times where you feel you'd love a little more privacy. And sometimes when people start knowing too much about your kids or your family or your vacations or things like that, it gets a little weird. But again, that just kind of comes with it. So you just got to take it in stride and keep smiling. Don't let them see you sweat.
Well, beautifully said. And thank you for all the work that you do with these great student athletes at TCU and the great coaches and the great administrators at the university. And like you said earlier, you have an incredible president at the university as well, who's helped to lead this through. And so thank you for the great work that you're doing to raise great people at Texas Christian University. Really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me on. This has been a lot of fun. And it's just been so fun, interacting with you and watching this podcast grow. And it's fun to think that the others will watch this and hopefully we'll pick up a couple new Horned Frogs.
Well, I think you're going to pick up a few more fans. You're also going to help some people with a few tactics and operational components that they can put into their own business. And if somebody wanted to continue to follow you, Jeremiah, to continue to listen to what you have to say, what would be the best way for somebody to do that?
Oh, we were just talking about social media. I'm on Twitter and Instagram. Instagram's probably the best. Twitter kind of gets overrun with a lot of advertisements and kind of fake DMs and all that stuff. So Instagram would be great. I'd love to hear from you.
Okay. Yeah, and what's your Instagram handle, Jeremiah?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask me that. jdonati_TCU.
Yeah, beautiful. And we'll put that in the show notes for everybody so that they can connect with you and follow along on your journey as a leader, as really a CEO of TCU Athletics. So thank you again for joining today, Jeremiah.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for joining the Talent Empowerment Podcast. I hope you transform your business or your athletics department by placing humans at the center, leveraging technology at speed, and enabling innovation at scale. Let's get back to people and culture together. We'll see you on the next episode.